Most of you know that I came to Denver after working for 3 years at a hospital as a chaplain and on the ethics committee. We had a neonatal intensive care unit at the hospital, a lower level intensive care unit with our 5th floor maternity ward. And the worst thing you could ever hear over a hospital sound system is Junior Code Blue. That's the worst thing. That's when the Code Blue team from ICU literally sprint down the hallways and up the stairs. It means that a Code Blue means that a person's heart has stopped. They've stopped breathing. They are technically dead. And when it's a Junior Code Blue, it means a newborn infant. We didn't treat children at the hospital, but we did treat as we give birth to newborn infants. And while I was used to, on the ethics committee, dealing with end-of-life decisions for people in their 80s and 90s on almost a daily basis, I had yet to experience having to do the same about a newborn baby girl. Her name was Ophelia. In Greek, it literally means to be helped. Her mom had given birth, and the doctor, as soon as he delivered this beautiful 9-month, on-time, beautiful baby girl, the doctor realized that she wasn't breathing. And they called this Junior Code Blue. We raced up, and the intensive care neonatal unit physician, in addition to the OBGYN that delivered baby Ophelia, were explaining to me that her chest cavities were filled with fluid and that there's no reason why. It just sometimes happens. And when I arrived into the neonatal intensive care unit, she was literally on this tiny little baby crib in ICU for babies, literally in a cruciform position. All kinds of things coming out of her arms. And her side was open, and there were tubes coming out trying to take out the blood and the water that was filling her cavity so that to help her breathe. And she laid there, newborn, beautiful, little, innocent, perfect baby girl, cruciform, with her side pierced and blood and water flowing out, just like Jesus on the cross described in John's first letter today. All kinds of things coming out of her arms and intubated through her nose and mouth. And the doctor told me we have to tell her mom that she's not going to make it. And to spare a lot of details, we had to essentially tell mom, your baby's not going to make it. Do you want to at least hold her while she dies? Because as soon as the baby was born, they rushed her into the neonatal intensive care unit. The mom hadn't even held her to her chest, hadn't been able to nurse her, hadn't been able to literally touch her since the moment of this baby's birth. And now we're inviting her to hold her for the first time and the last. So we brought in mom, we disconnected all the tubes and things around baby Ophelia. We wrapped her up in this beautiful swaddling blanket and baby cap, and her nose was just perfect and her cheeks still pink and beautiful. And we sat mom down with her husband and me, and the intensive care neonatal unit physician and her OBGYN stood there with nurses around her. We put up this barrier, a triptych, to give them privacy in the neonatal care unit where there were other children and their parents. And the doctors and nurses and I stood there as she held her baby girl and kissed her nose and sung her lullabies and held her to her cheek and her breast. And we just cried. We cried and we prayed as we watched Ophelia take her last breaths in her mother's arms. I grabbed her mother's cell phone and took pictures where I could see the back of her mom's head and Ophelia's beautiful little face, knowing that this would be the first and last time she would see her baby girl, and these would be the only pictures of her child. We stood there and we bore the burden of the ache and agony of mom and dad watching Ophelia die, the physicians, the nurses, and myself. We stood there in solidarity to help mom carry the burden of this beautiful newborn baby girl, their first day together and their last. Before that moment came, we were able to celebrate her baptism and confirmation while she was still tied up in the tubes and everything coming out of her side and her nose and her mouth and the veins in her arms. She was a Christian, baptized and confirmed, going home to the Father far too soon, in the arms of her earthly mother. As we celebrate this Divine Mercy Sunday, God reminds us that he carries the burden of our agony, the agony caused by our own sins. Jesus bears that on his shoulders, and he calls us to carry the agony of others. It's what the word compassion means, to suffer with the other. The doctors could have left. There's nothing more we can do here. I've got other patients, but they didn't. They stood by Ophelia and her mom and dad. The nurses could have taken care of the other kids in the ICU, but they didn't. They stood by and cried with mom and us. I could have gone to another patient. There are plenty of patients in ICU and other parents worried about their babies, but I didn't. We stayed there in agony with, carrying the weight and burden of this tremendous loss and pain. To suffer with the other is what mercy is all about. Now, theologically and philosophically, we can talk about this issue of ontic evil. Ophelia died through no fault of her own or her parents or the physician. It's just a freak thing that happens, according to what the doctor explained to me. We can talk about this idea of ontic evil and why it exists because of original sin, or those suffering in St. Vincent in the Grenadines, the Caribbean, with the volcano erupting. No one caused it, it just happens, and yet people are displaced or died or impoverished. They lose their livelihood, their homes, etc. But what about personal evil? What about the face of facing someone who is just so profoundly repulsive on a moral level? It makes us just utterly repulsed. Maybe it's positions that we profoundly disagree with as Catholics, or politically, issues of abortion and gender issues or immigration, and we feel this repugnance in the face of people who have a profound ignorance and or hatred of Jesus or certain fundamental goods. I think of Thomas in the gospel today. It's only in John's gospel where we hear that Thomas, and this is repugnant. Okay, first, Thomas he not only doesn't believe Peter, we've seen the Lord, he's risen. He wasn't there. Where were you, first of all? And then he responds by saying, unless I put my fingers into the holes of his hands and my hand into his side. I mean, it's repulsive. And I think I know why it's only in John's gospel, not in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because John was there, and he saw when they put the holes in Jesus' hand. John was there, and he saw when they pierced his side with the lance. It must have been profoundly painful and repugnant for John to hear Thomas say such a horrific thing. Thomas, how could you? I was there. I'll never forget the screams of Jesus as they drove that nail into the wood through his hands. Thomas, how could you? I was at the foot of the cross holding Mary as she wept when they pierced his side and we were bathed with his blood and water. How could you, Thomas? Here it is in John's gospel. And yet they remain silent in the face of this repugnant response, seeing the hardness of Thomas's heart. And Jesus responds. He comes a week later, again on Sunday, the day of the resurrection, and he doesn't chide Thomas or condemn him for such a repulsive statement, for such a hardness of heart, disgusting. Jesus appears again just for Thomas's sake, the least of the apostles to deserve it. And he says, peace be with you. Put your finger here and see my hands. Bring your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but believe. Jesus' response to such a repugnant, hard-hearted person. Do we respond the same to fallen away Catholics, active Catholics, former Catholics, non-Catholics, when they propose ideas and thoughts and positions that are utterly repugnant? Peace be with you. This is the message of mercy that we celebrate today. As God is toward us, he calls us to be toward others, to carry the weight of the agony of another. to carry the weight of the agony of the hardness of heart of our own child who's now an adult and doesn't practice the faith, or who hates the church, or our grandkids who aren't even baptized and they deserve it and they're perfect and innocent and beautiful, and why won't they be baptized? To think of our siblings or our parents who have become so hardened like Thomas. We want to be angry because we're thinking about ourselves. But if we have the heart of Christ in the face of such repugnance, we would say the same words, "Peace be with you. Come and see." And do not be unbelieving, but believe. Can we carry not only the agony to suffer with, the compassion to suffer with those who suffer innocently, but the agony that comes with suffering from those who in a very malignant way have proposed evil, support evil, have practiced such evil? Can we carry in agony the weight of the suffering that has brought to Christ, rather than reacting to the hardness of heart with anger, condemnation, or vile bitterness? Jesus said to him, "Have you come to believe because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and have believed." But blessed was Thomas, because in spite of his horrific, repugnant response to Peter and the other apostles' witness, "We have seen the Lord," to our witness, "I know the Lord, he is risen." Oh, you're ridiculous. You're crazy. What's wrong with you? Fanatic. You're irrational, right? In spite of his response to their witness and the response we get to our witness to Christ, he is the one who responds with the most faith when Jesus returns again to that hardened sinner, answering, "My Lord and my God." Words that many Catholics say as the priest elevates the host during Mass after consecration, "My Lord and my God. I only see bread, Lord, but I know that it's truly you, body, blood, soul, and divinity." This Divine Mercy Sunday, we recall that Jesus carries the weight of the suffering caused by ontic and personal evil, the weight of the whole world. And he invites us to get under that cross with him, like Simon of Cyrene, and to carry the weight of the sufferings of others. "I will suffer with you, whether you deserve that suffering or not. I will carry this for you out of love for Christ, not because you deserve it, but because Jesus does. Not because of who you are, but because of who I am." As Ophelia took her last breaths in her mother's arms, and we wept in her presence, the mother proved to be the strongest among us. A profound faith, a deep gratitude just to be able to hold her baby girl before the burial. She bore witness to us who suffered the most. Not unlike Christ, she held Christ in her arms, Ophelia cruciform on that NICU bed, with her side pierced and blood and water flowing out, not quick enough to save her life. She stood as a witness to us. Whether it's someone who suffers ontic evil or those who suffer as a result of their own personal choices, Christ for us suffers with us and for us. That's the face of mercy. And he calls us to do the same. Because that person who may be suffering because of their own choices and personal evils might become like Thomas if we are like Jesus and experience a real conversion, to go from a repugnant response to the suffering of Christ to one of profound faith. Even them, even us. As we stood and saw Ophelia take her last breath, as I saw her cruciform on that bed, as I see so many suffering because of their own choices or otherwise, as I look at Jesus lifted up on the altar, how can we not say in response to God's divine mercy what Thomas said in the end? "My Lord and my God."